Hi everyone, this is Module 4 of the Clean Fleets online training package, and here we are going to be looking at the concept of life cycle costing and its practical application within the Clean Vehicles Directive. Unit 1 of this module will be providing an introduction and overview to the concept of life cycle costing. So firstly, an important clarification of definitions and terms, as there's a fair bit of confusion about what life cycle costing means and how it relates to other rather similar expressions. The first of these, which is very different, is life cycle assessment, or LCA. These two sound very similar, but actually are very different terms. Life cycle assessment is looking specifically at the lifetime environmental impacts of a product or activity, but not the costs necessarily of those impacts. So it is not the same as LCC. The second of these is a term which is actually often used within the UK, and that is whole life costing. This is often used in the same way as life cycle costing, but it can mean rather different things. It can be rather broader in scope than LCC, and so for our purposes we think this term is best avoided. The third one is operational lifetime costing, and we'll hear more about this within this module later on in the next unit. This is a term provided by the Commission within the Clean Vehicles Directive, but here specifically this is looking at monetising only the environmental costs relating to the vehicle, so not the financial costs that accrue to the organisation itself. And the final one of these is total cost of ownership, and for the purposes that we have here, total cost of ownership and life cycle costing, TCO and LCC, are more or less the same, and they are looking at the total costs associated with buying, leasing and owning a product from when it comes into your ownership to when you dispose of it. Okay, so what specific costs does LCC and TCO cover? First of these obviously is the acquisition costs. What's the cost of purchasing the vehicle itself? The cost of delivery as well. This could also include leasing costs rather than acquisition costs. Secondly, if there are any installation costs related to the product or service, perhaps you need a new recharging station produced, for example, you can include that within an LCC TCO calculation. Thirdly, very importantly, when you're talking about vehicles, are of course the operating costs. What is the fuel being consumed? But there are other aspects related to vehicle operating costs, of course, as well. Fourthly, we have maintenance and repair costs. Again, in the vehicle sector, this is a very important aspect to be considered. Then there are any taxes or fees. Possibly this can also include subsidies in the case of alternative fueled vehicles. And finally, you have disposal cost, or potentially for a vehicle, the resale value, if you're going to sell the vehicle on to someone else. So those are the key elements contained within the calculation, and to be honest, it makes complete sense. So why doesn't every public authority take an LCC approach when they're purchasing new vehicles? Now there are a number of different barriers that public authorities face in the application of LCC, not insurmountable barriers, but substantial barriers nevertheless. The first of these is a lack of communication, but also a split of budgetary responsibilities between different departments, which makes LCC a very complicated process. There may be one department responsible for purchasing, one department responsible for fuel costs, for example. How do you apportion the budget within that process? Also, within public authorities, there tends to be a focus on short-term budgets, annual budgets for just that 1 year. So, of course, if you're increasing initial acquisition costs, it sounds as if you're increasing your budget, although in fact the savings are being made later down the life through reduced fuel costs, for example. Connected to this, changing political priorities within a municipality and the political cycle. In many municipalities, a particular administration will be there for 4 years. After that, things can change. Looking at things from a longer-term budgetary perspective is not necessarily within the political interest. Fourthly, currently very important, is the intense public scrutiny that public authorities are facing. So the idea of spending money now, even if it's saving money later, is not an attractive political idea. Okay, so how do we actually encourage the use of life cycle costing? As I've mentioned, it seems to make sense, but it's not being used. And of course, one of the most important aspects in doing this is to actually demonstrate where those savings have been achieved. And we're doing this within the Clean Fleets project by trying to produce case studies which indicate here are the substantial savings that you have made. And this can help to get to the buy-in from the senior level, which helps to address this issue of cross-departmental splits. It's important also to use the fact that a life cycle costing methodology provides you with a useful forecasting tool in financial circles, so you can predict future costs, and for financial departments this is a very important element to their own planning.